Elle Ingalls here, and this is the Pressure Free Leadership Series. I'm so glad you're tuning in because we have a really special guest, David Richards, who's going to talk about himself, share who he is, and then we'll launch into our talk today about leadership and about how we can help you become a better leader, step into your true leadership, without all that stress and burnout, so you can really achieve the way you know deep inside you were meant to. So welcome, David.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So yes, please introduce yourself and tell us who you are, and we'll just dive into this topic.
Awesome. Sounds great. Yeah, my name is David Richards, and I am an educator turned executive coach and mindfulness teacher. And it's kind of funny that I say turned into because I've always been those things, but now they're showing up in my life in a different way. But yeah, so I spent most of my career in education really trying to think about how can we create better schools for our kids. And so I spent a lot of time in California in public charter schools. And I say public because they are actually publicly funded and open to everyone. And when I turned 30, I decided that I wanted to go into education. So I actually had a little career before I became an educator. And I really believed that there was something that I wasn't following, like my purpose, right? So as leaders, we get really in line with our purpose when we start to get really good at this and we lead from purpose, right? And so I was working on the outside, it looked great. I was working in 2 blocks from the White House in Washington, D.C. I was a corporate and institutional banker. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I had graduated from UC Berkeley. So I was, the star of the show. And here I was, I don't know, year 7 into my career. And I turned 30 and I asked myself, is this really all there is? And I started asking the people around me, do you love what you do? And they said, well, I love the fact that it's corporate banking and we get off at 501 every day. Like their answers were, I love my weekends and my hobbies, but they didn't really love their job. So at that moment, I followed something much bigger than myself. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go become a teacher. And I literally quit my job at the bank and everybody thought I was insane. Like, how could you, my family was kind of like, you're the breadwinner. What are you doing? You can't leave your fancy job. But I just felt like there was something pulling me much greater. And it was a purpose beyond me. And I really felt like I'm just a born teacher. And so at that moment, it was like, go teach in teenagers in public schools. And so I went to Stanford, which I think was helpful in my transition because it felt like the status was still there. But I did get a master's in teaching credential and then went straight into the Oakland public school system in California, which is a really dysfunctional urban school district. And that was quite a journey. And then I found the charter schools and went from a teacher to principal to an executive. And then I turned 40 and I realized I was kind of doing the same thing again in this district office. And I was not really leading as a teacher and leading from my highest purpose. And so I once again quit my job in a very insane way. I was an executive. I had, the white picket fence, everything you're supposed to get. And I had supposedly arrived. But I had a health scare and my face was paralyzed. I got Bell's palsy, which if you Google it, nobody really knows what it is. I mean, they know what it is, but they don't know why you get it. And basically I had run myself into the ground. I'd opened 10 schools in 10 years. I'd climbed the ladder really quickly from teacher to principal to executive. I was in line to be the successor CEO of an organization that had schools ranked in the top 10 in the US. So it was like a really high performing organization. And I just decided I was quitting because my life had fallen apart. I was sick. I had an inner ear, pain for like 6 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I was so tired. So I just decided that it was time to really take care of myself. And that was the moment that I changed my life and I really embarked upon the journey of mindfulness and meditation. And that's why today I want to help people really understand that's why I love what you do, because I really want to help people understand how to live their life with purpose and have, a free life and live in peace and not have to sacrifice your health and your body for success. And that's what I'm committed to helping other people do.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. It's so important, and obviously you're not a very high achiever, David.
Not at all, not at all.
And it's a blessing and a curse because I don't think a high
Yeah,
achiever can really turn that off. It's like we were just
exactly.
born to work at that kind of a level.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, you and I, when we first met, there was such connection because you can burn out and you can really hurt yourself and you
Yeah.
can leave the planet. Like I actually thought at one point in my life I was just gonna like leave the planet because
Yeah.
it was so intense. And so I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about your coaching and
Yeah.
some sharing you could do here.
Yeah, no problem. So the way I like to coach people is I really work with what I call change makers. So people that are looking to create some sort of change in their context. Typically, I work with educators, but I work with all different types of industries. But I'm really helping you if you're the type of person that's feeling like something has to change. And I do feel like, we're in this massive paradigm shift. That's something I like to talk about too, is that we are experiencing a big paradigm shift in the world around a lot of the old systems and institutions, the way of doing things are dying. So I've always been very innovative and very kind of like cutting edge and kind of futuristic. Like I'm always my brain's always like 30 years in the future. So I love to work with people that have something that really wants to come through them and they're just not really sure how to implement it. So I help people have an idea or they have a big picture vision and they're not sure how to make it happen. I opened 10 schools in 10 years and they're all from scratch. So I'm not one to like, somebody asked me the other day if I wanted to take over someone else's high school. And I was like, no, that's not what I do. Like, well, they got approved for a high school and then nobody wants to run it. Why don't you just take their high school? And I was like, no, that's not really my thing. So I like to work with people that feel like there's something that's really coming through them that's like their calling. Like I said, I quit my job both at 30 and 40 because there was this calling that was really like coming through me. It was just wanting to come out. And so I love to sit down with people and I have a process that I follow around like really helping you clarify your vision and then how can we implement the mindfulness and meditation practices that I use into your daily life? So, what are the things in your daily life that you can do? Meditation, breath work, gratitude, whatever the practices are that I'm teaching. And I literally hold your hand and we go through it together and similar to the work you do, Al. And I have online courses and I have my one-to-one coaching and my mastermind groups. And there's a kind of a place for everybody. I'm launching a membership group. So there's a place for everybody to get the support they need. But really, it's about mindfulness for change makers. So if you're a change maker or high performer, somebody who really wants to usher in a new paradigm in this paradigm shift we're in, I'm here to help you.
Wow. So when you talk about implementation, do you actually put together plans with people, like step by
Yeah, it
step
depends on what
plans?
people need. Yeah, some
Okay.
people really want like very tactical. So what people like about me is that I'm very much in the kind of mindfulness abstract world. But similar to you, I'm also like, let's get this done on the ground.
All right.
So people like that about me because they can kind of get the best of both worlds. So if you want to, maybe you're really an execution type person and you're not good at thinking about the concepts or the big picture, then I help you really get your vision in order. Or maybe you're more of the type of person that's like, I need somebody to help me get the idea into practice. So wherever you need, it's very tailored. But being an executive for all those years, I'm really good at strategic advice and kind of thinking about, what are the strategies or what's the strategic direction you can take to get your idea from a concept into reality.
What are some of the main things that you see are blocking people before they come to you? Like what's holding them back?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things for me, because I grew up in poverty and like I said, I was the first one in my family to go to college, I had a lot of childhood trauma. So what I see with a lot of my clients is that there's a real imposter syndrome going on.
Mhm.
There's this lack of belief in themselves or this comparison to others. And so really what I see is that they're blocking themselves by their own fears, their own worries, their own concerns. And that's why I really teach living in the present moment. Like, how can you be in the present moment? If you start to see your mind go a little crazy with the future or the past, then how do you just like come back to the now moment and get really clear with yourself? Because we have this part of ourselves that's so expansive and just wise. And if we can really tap into that part of ourselves, then it's kind of funny, like what things we actually think are holding us back that are not real. And you work with a coach, and I love the part in the session when you say your client says something out loud, and everybody starts laughing because in your head it seems so real. It's like, well, I feel like I've said, I feel like I don't have any credibility, and then my coach will just start laughing out loud. She's like, you have a Stanford degree, you are a CEO, you founded 10 schools, like you've done all this stuff. You're an executive person. Yeah, but I just don't have the credibility because I haven't done XYZ. It's like the stories that your mind makes up and they seem so real in your head and
Oh
you're
my
creating
God.
your own suffering. So what I see is that people are typically stuck in their mind, kind of monkey mind, and not creating their own suffering. And that if they could just release those blocks, it's like they can just go.
Wow. That reminds me of a time I was in a mastermind, and sitting next to me was a woman who had worked at one of the top marketing agencies in the world for 25 years, very high salary. And now we were starting our own businesses, or, we were a few years into our business.
Yeah.
And there was this bit of frustration, like, we've been so successful in our other lives, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Why can't we do that here? And
Yeah.
as solopreneurs, we're solo promoting. And that
Right.
really gets into that idea of, am I worthy? Am I good enough?
Yes.
Am I, all of that. And we looked at each other and we're like, grasp each other's hands. Or like,
Yes.
we can do this,
Yes. I know. But it feels so real. And I think this is where the work that I do around mindfulness is that if you can really connect with this higher version of yourself and not the kind of like scared false self, then you can start to see that those stories are not true. And it does actually a lot of times take a coach or a group or somebody to help you see these. But my goal of people I work with is to actually get them to self-coach. So for years, I've kind of learned how to do that on my own. So it's like, okay, write it out, write it down, say it out loud. Is it true that you don't have any credibility? It's like I was putting my website together 3 years ago, and the guy designing it kept asking me, who are your industry leaders that can actually give you authority? And I was like, well, in education, I have so many, but I want to move into the mindfulness space. So I was like, I don't have any. And then I was just feeling so bad about myself. Like, there's not one person that says that I'm good at teaching mindfulness. And it was just so funny. And then I realized that it was just not true at all, and it was basically something that happened, something in my traumatic childhood said, you're not worthy unless somebody tells you are. So this guy's now asking you, do you have an industry leader to validate you? And you don't. So therefore, you're not worthy. So therefore, you should go hide in the corner and use all your coping strategies that you do when you don't feel worthy, which is like run away and don't do it. Right. So I ended up taking another year to like actually launch the website because I felt like, well, I'm not worthy enough to move into this space. Like I just got to stay in education. And then after time went on, I'm like, why are we separating all these things? Like I said at the beginning, I've always been a teacher, whether it's been at the bank or at the school or as a coach or doing executive work. It's like I'm always teaching. That's the through line no matter what. But the mind and the stories will tell you, no, you're not this or you're not that, and then you'll get really caught up.
Yeah, so interesting. And I was just working with one of my coaches before we came on this call. By the way, people are like, coaches have coaches. We
Yes,
invest in coaching.
Yes, we do.
My coach in this case is a high level Emmy-winning messaging coach.
Oh, cool.
So yeah,
Nice.
it's funny how I've been working with her for months, and it wasn't until today that I shared a story about my past, and she's like, oh, that's it.
Yes.
It was a story I was so reluctant to bring forward.
Yeah.
So reluctant to bring forward a real low point in my life. And I love how you shared when you came on here about how 30 and I just leave this thing, 40 and I just leave this thing. It's hard to leave some things. When I left my violin studio in 2018, that was really hard. I've been teaching violin since I was 16.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how we sometimes have blinders on, and the coach helps. The coach helps with that.
Well, the best coaches help you see the truth you already know, right? So I know this from being a teacher. I was never the guy that would like lecture and ask people, the kids to, recall information. It was always like the Dead Poet Society, right? Like, let's do a Socratic seminar, because I really believe that they kind of knew the truth and they knew the answers within themselves. Of course, it taught them information and knowledge and stuff like that. But similarly, now as a coach, it's like the best coaches are able to get you to see the truth by the mirror of what they're asking or what they're showing you. And so when you can see the truth, it's like, oh, so you knew that it was time for you to leave the violin studio. I knew that it was time for me to leave this executive job that felt like it was absolute, in craziness. But there was something within us that was guiding us. That's really the deep truth within us. And then what's so cool when you do that, when you take that courageous leap, and this is leadership, if we're talking about leadership, you take the courageous leap to follow the truth, to follow your soul's calling, to follow the guidance within you. And all of a sudden, everything just opens up. Like when I left the bank at age 30, by the time I was 37, I was making more money than I was making at the bank as a chief schools officer in the charter school world. So it's like the financial worries didn't come true. And
Oh, right.
I was alive. Like I was so alive every day. I was dead at the bank. Like I was watching the clock. When I was teaching and working in the charter schools and being a principal, I was alive like every second of the day. Like I would work 12, 14 hours a day and it never felt like work. Right. And so when you start to answer the call and you start to follow through with what really is your path and you let go, that's why I love these stories of, you kind of leaving the violin studio and me leaving. It's because, and you could see it in small ways too. Like I just had to kind of stop a business partnership. And I was so scared to do it because in my mind, we were going to be doing this for years and years and years. And then one day actually got COVID. I got COVID and I was quite sick and I was in bed for like 7 days. And I was like, oh, okay. I need to actually transition from this partnership. And I was like, wait, what? That can't be right. And so then I've done this for so many years now. I'm like, okay, you can't fight the truth. You can't fight what's the truth. And so now I have to discern, what am I going to do as a leader? And I had to remember that we had agreed if I was ever going to not follow, keep up with the partnership that I had given, that I would have to give 90 days notice, as we had agreed on that in the first week we started working together. And so I thought, okay, well, let me get really, really clear before I say anything to my partner, and let me get really, really clear within myself. And this is what I teach every single leader. So I coach a lot of leaders that run schools and executives, and I always tell them, until you're absolutely clear within yourself, don't lead. Like don't lead outside. Don't go and try and tell somebody or change something. Just wait until you're really, really clear within yourself. Because that energy, when you're talking to your team or the person you're breaking up with or whatever's happening, it's so strong that people respond to it. So when I left my executive job, I spoke with my mentor that has spent 10 years training me, and it was like a 5-minute conversation. I said, I'm ready to leave and go start my own organization. She said, oh, that's amazing. How could I talk you out of that? And I'm like, oh, I had all these bullet points ready to argue with you because, she was really good at retaining her best talent. So I was like, she's not going to let me walk out the door. I'm her successor. And she said, no, I can feel that this is your dream and I'm not going to block your dream. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And similarly with my business partner, she said, that's amazing. Thank you for following your truth. Like, now let's talk about next steps. And it was like so simple, but I had spent all this time worrying about it. So yeah, when you really get clear with the truth and then bring it forward as a leader, people respond in kind.
Yes. I loved how you talked about the difference between watching the clock and then you're all in with your passion.
Yeah.
And that is such a clear distinction. So you could ask yourself, are you watching the clock?
Yeah.
I don't even have a clock in my studio when I coach. I don't have a clock.
I believe it.
And I book an extra half hour after every person because I don't even want to know what time it is. I just want to be with you,
Yes.
And so, it's the clock thing. I'm glad you brought that forward. I think that's a huge takeaway for people to discern. Am I watching the clock or am I really in this thing?
Yeah, because it feels so incredibly different. And I've had so many jobs before I went into teaching where I was watching the clock, like pretty much my whole 20s. I was just watching the clock. And it's just not a fun place to be. It's really not, because you feel trapped. You feel trapped.
Yeah. So with that, the transition, I mean, I'm thinking about what amazing transitions you help people make and that discernment about when you are ready to go. It's that it is tricky to navigate.
It's tricky to navigate. And I remember I was at a conference and there were two coach leader people, and one of them said, a woman had asked a question in the audience, like, when shall I leave my job? And one of the coaches said, immediately, like, I can feel that you're ready to go. And so then this woman was like, oh, okay, well, do I just quit? Like, what do I do? And then the person who was actually hosting the conference, who had asked this other person to come, the next morning, this other coach said, I have to clean up what happened yesterday, because my opinion is very different than the other coach, which is, yes, you get clear on your truth, but then you kind of figure out the next steps in the real world, like in the world in front of you, like your finances and your, timelines. And some people recommend you just jump because they believe that, the universe is going to provide, and like you jump. And that's one way of doing it. And she was like, that's not what I believe. What I believe is that you kind of discern and take your steps accordingly. So I'm much more on the take your steps. I'm a very pragmatic person. So it's like, what are the steps you need to take? Is it like a 30-day plan, a 90-day plan, 1 year? What is the plan, and how do you transition? Like for me, I ended up resigning from my school, but I didn't actually quit. I moved to a consulting role, which is actually
right.
another example. I knew that I needed to leave the school, my current school that I started as the founder, like in year 3. And I'm like, what? I'm supposed to be here for a while. And so I met with the board chair, and he said, well, it sounds to me like you're ready to go. So I have an idea for you. And again, 2-minute conversation. He goes, why don't you become a consultant? We'll go ahead and leverage your talent and your expertise as the founder. And why don't you promote the principal to executive director? And then you and I can kind of transition her over the next year. And as you're building your new business, you can kind of do both. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a yes and. This is amazing. And so I always ask people, like, what is it that you're clear about? What are you clear that you want? You want to move towards that, or you want to move towards X. So then what do you need to do to move towards that? And you stay open. And the universe does really provide. Like I had lunch with the board chair, and I thought it was going to be this complicated conversation. And once again, he made it really simple. And he said, yeah, I'll get the board on track. Like they won't mind, they'll understand. And I ended up not even leaving. I've now been doing this advisory role for 3 years. So I'm able to advise the school, to advise my baby, right? Like my project that I started, without being there more than about 8 hours. Like I go there 1 day a week. So I'm able to build other businesses. It's not always an either or. Sometimes you can create an and, which is, the genius of the and is one of the best lessons that any leader should follow. The genius of the and.
Genius of the and. Genius of the end. I recently watched Jennifer Lopez's documentary of her going to the Super Bowl that year. And there's a moment in there where she's like, I want to be a singer, and I want to be an actress, and yes. I want to do it all.
Yes.
And so many people were telling her, you're not an actress. You're not, she's never won an Oscar, despite what is it, 50 films? Like, it's ridiculous how much work that woman does. Yeah. But she just doesn't stop. She doesn't let the conventions stop her. And
yes, I love it.
I just really love that. When I was creating a music school, my husband and I created a music school for our community. And so many people told us, it'll never happen here. You'll just never be able to do it here. Yes. Even someone who was an educator, a superintendent who had now moved to another city, saw a colleague of mine and said, wow, if she can do that in that cow town, she'll be able to do anything. Like, it was actually that. And it was so incredible. And we created an awesome school, but kind of like you, I was never the director.
Yeah.
I was never the director. I created this thing and handed it immediately over to others to run it while I was over here in the executive role.
Yes.
And so I think that's important for people to know too. And you brought it forward so well. It's like, it's okay to move over here, be an advisor, do this, and let this baby flourish, maybe in a different way than you might have. It's okay.
You thought, exactly. And I feel like what you're calling out is when you have this conviction, like Jennifer Lopez, or as a leader, and you know the truth within you. And this is why, I do deep meditation, and I follow, all these mindfulness practices on a daily basis, because I know that when there's a crossroads, or when there's something that I need to decide on, like a big decision, that the truth is within me. And when I get clear on that, like, you could say whatever you want. The president of the United States could tell me it's a bad idea, right? And I'll be like, that's wonderful. I didn't know that you were friends with my soul, but my soul actually is my guide and not the president. So, so if I know the truth within my soul, I'm like, oh, okay, this is it. And again, my poor wife, like when I quit the jobs at 30 and 40, she was like, what are you doing? What about the mortgage? And I'm like, well, we'll figure it out. And when I left my executive job, we were actually without income for several months with two small children. And, she almost had a heart attack because I'm more a risk taker than she is. But what happened was the money literally came through the week before we needed it. Like a
Oh,
funder came through. It always happens that way. And the exact amount of money came. And so it always does work out when you're convicted within yourself and you know what's actually true. And so
mhm.
that's why I spend a lot of time with my clients talking about really following the intuitive leader within you and really getting to know that feeling of what's true within you, because no one else is like you. So no, somebody else could have failed trying to make a music school in the cow town, quote unquote,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
you weren't going to, because you knew that it was your thing. And
Yeah.
I love it when that happens, by the way, with entrepreneurs. Everything I've ever done, people have all told me it's never gonna happen. And I'm
Oh
always
my
like,
God.
oh, this makes me want to do it more.
It's I'm going to get us on together here as we get to close out here, but this idea too um of when you do know the truth and staying strong no matter how low things go.
Yes.
I sold rings off my hands to keep my
Yeah.
business going. One of my sons really didn't get a Christmas present for like 4 years. Like and my kids were completely supportive of what I was doing.
Yeah.
Like they believed. And so we went through some stuff as a family. And it was all worth it. And now our entire family are all entrepreneurs, like all of us.
I love it.
And it's a wild way to live,
Yes,
but
it is.
I look at the growth and the understanding and what's happening and how we support each other, providing safety net for each other. It's marvelous. And the money somehow does show up. Like it's pretty
Yeah, it
incredible.
does.
I don't know. I used to say I could just pull money out of my butt. I don't know. Somehow we're going to get through this month, and then it is interesting. But when you're on that path, it's like you can't not stop.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Well
Wow.
said.
So do you have any parting words or suggestions or thoughts before we close out here, David?
Yeah, I think my parting words are kind of what I was saying before is, on my little quote on my website, it says, always trust yourself. And that's really my guiding belief. And that, again, really trust the wisdom of your soul and trust yourself. And I feel like we've been taught, this is why I'm trying to change the way we do school, because we've been taught that we should trust everybody else on the outside, right? That somebody else needs to validate us, that somebody else needs to tell us what's true, somebody else needs to tell us what's right. We need to follow authority figures, we need to follow this, we need to follow that. And we're not really taught that the truth within you is actually the ultimate supreme truth. And so that's what I always teach. Like I always tell my clients, if you got nothing from me in our 4 sessions or 6-month course or my mastermind, you got nothing, but you actually trust yourself, like you trust your own wisdom, then I feel like I've done my job. So that would be my parting advice.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. This idea of your inner truth. It's powerful, very powerful. Well, David, thank you so much. We're going to have links below here so that people can connect to you.
Great.
And I'm just really grateful to know you. So grateful to connect here and have you share. We need this. I mean, it's so cool you're working with educators because we really need to see a big shift. And I
Yes,
feel
we
like
do.
a renaissance is on the way. So
I do too.
I hope it's in my lifetime. Okay.
I know. It's
I
hard to
feel
say the
it.
timing.
I feel it in my own
Yeah.
children who are,
Yes.
22 to 30, but I feel a renaissance.
Yes.
And we're on the cutting edge of it. And we're helping people get there. So thank
Yep.
you so much for what you do.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we'll close out. Stay tuned for our next guest tomorrow. And I'm so glad you're watching this leadership series, that you're enjoying it. And we'll just keep it rolling here. Have a good one. Bye.